Welcome to Pittman and Friends, the curiously probing, sometimes awkward, but always revealing conversations between your host, Anne Arundel County Executive Stuart Pittman, that's me, and whatever brave and willing public servant, community leader, or elected official I can find who has something to say that you should hear. This podcast is provided as a public service of Anne Arundel County, so don't expect me to get all partisan here. This is about the age-old art of government, of, by, and for the people. All right, well, I'm here today with my friend Anne Colt Leitess, the state's attorney of Anne Arundel County. Welcome.
Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, it's great to have you because you, I think unlike some state's attorneys, you're not out in the public a lot. We don't see you a lot. I see you at budget time. Every once in a while there's something that we talk about, but I feel like you quietly do this work of making sure that the bad guys are somewhere where they're not going to hurt the public, and we like it that way. But could you give us a sort of a better sense of what the mission of the Office of State's Attorney is and the scope of it?
Sure. Well, we prosecute every case from serious traffic all the way up to homicide. Anything that happens on our water or highways, any property really in Anne Arundel County other than maybe federal government property, we have the jurisdiction. So if it's in the city of Annapolis, or it's an Anne Arundel County case, or a Maryland State Police case, even things that occur on the BW Parkway, we have our hand in it. So we handle every one of those types of cases, and we also screen cases when people are charged with crimes to see if there's actually enough information to go forward. So one of the things that people don't really realize about what we do is we clear a lot of people who may be incorrectly charged or wrongfully charged. If you have a disgruntled neighbor who decides to charge you with harassment or stalking and there's no evidence there and it's kind of retaliatory, we clear a lot of people as well.
So you screen things, and you keep then the courts from being overwhelmed with
Absolutely.
Cases that really don't belong in court.
One of the more interesting things that I do is every homicide that occurs, I'm personally involved in screening that with the police and making sure it's ready to go before it's charged. It has to kind of have our okay because the police have to be confident that they have a good case, and we have to be confident that we can present that case and be successful in court.
So you are in constant communication with police?
Well, sometimes they're calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning. So yes, and then we meet as well. But they do a great job, and they don't really rely on us as much as you might think, but we do have duty attorneys on schedule every single day, and if it comes up to me, it's usually because it's a very, very serious matter, for example, homicide or some other major case.
So you have a team of attorneys. How many?
So we have funding for up to 62, including me, and we fluctuate between maybe 57 and 62 attorneys. We have a staff total of about 144 and more than $16 million budget.
And my understanding is they don't get paid as much as attorneys who are in private practice generally if they're in a major firm.
Generally, although the salaries have improved dramatically over the last few years throughout the state of Maryland for prosecutors, we've found that to keep people as attorneys, to get the best people out of law schools, the starting salary had to rise as well as the continuing salary. So I think Anne Arundel County has done a pretty good job of that. But there's really a downturn in applications for prosecutors, downturn in applications for police over the years. So we're hoping to keep those numbers growing in the right direction.
So you have to actively recruit, and then when you get a good one, you want to keep them, right?
Yes. And we sometimes lose people to other jurisdictions. Other jurisdictions say they need a sexual offense prosecutor that maybe is just learning the job in Anne Arundel County. Some other county may throw $20,000 more at them and kind of steal them away. So that's a problem. Or the Attorney General's office may need some experienced attorneys, and maybe it's a different type of law they would be practicing, more money, maybe less pressure. So we're constantly competing with some of our partners to keep the best people.
Because I remember, for people who don't know, this is an elected office, statewide, countywide, sorry.
Yes.
And so I remember when you were running for this job back in 2018, one of your campaign promises was to do a better job of training the attorneys,
yes,
so that they were effective and they would win.
Yes, that's what we do. No attorney goes into court without about 2.5 months training. We don't just kind of cut people loose and stick them in the courtroom because you're going up against experienced defense attorneys in the district court. Even though it's district court and misdemeanors, you still have very experienced defense bar and public defenders. So we make sure everybody's well trained, and then we have annual trainings at the Maryland States Attorneys Association. We spend money. We have our training budget, and we spend money to train people in specialty areas. And we also have a full-time training director who's dedicated. Not only does she train our attorneys, she also trains the police department at the police academy.
Okay. And so I'm hoping we'll have time to get into some of the, towards the end maybe, some of the things that you're doing to improve the functioning of the office. I know you've done a lot of victims work, and you come to us with a budget request every year, and we talk about some of those things. But let's back up first, and I want to ask you how you ended up in this job, starting from maybe way back when you were a kid in school.
Right. I was actually in high school, and we went on a field trip to a federal courthouse, saw prosecutors and defense attorneys in the courtroom, and I said, I'm hooked on this. And I don't really like the idea of people getting away with serious crimes. I feel like I want to speak for the people who might not have a voice, victims. And I was really drawn to homicides. And when I was a University of Baltimore law student, I was a law clerk as well for the homicide unit in Baltimore City, right when David Simon was writing his book, Homicide, Life on the Street. And so I was actually working on the cases that became the subject matter, or were the subject matter of the book, and then the TV show. I actually was involved in a lot of those cases, preparing them for grand jury and for trial. And ever since I've been hooked, I love prosecuting difficult, challenging cases like that.
You prosecuted your campaign pretty effectively too, I remember. So you worked, obviously you went to law school. Was your first job with the Baltimore State's Attorney?
Yes, I was a law clerk for the Baltimore State's Attorney's Office for about 18 months, and then a lawyer for 18 months in juvenile, trying lots and lots of cases. And then my fiance at the time, now my husband of 33 years, fell in love with Anne Arundel County. We would come to Annapolis all the time, and at the Maryland States Attorneys Association, he walked up to Frank Weathersby, who was the longtime state's attorney for more than 30 years in Anne Arundel County, and said, "Hey, Frank, are you hiring?" Which I was, of course, embarrassed. And he happened to say, "We have 2 assistant state's attorney positions." And my husband kind of pushed his way into my fiance at the time, getting us 2 interviews. And
you both got
we
hired.
both got interviews. But the funny thing is, they asked us, well, what if we hire him and not you? And I can't believe I said this, but I said that would be your loss. So we both got hired. He stayed for a couple years, 2 or 3 years, and then he went out into private practice, and I stayed and never left.
Okay. So you stayed in Anne Arundel, and then but then you went back to Baltimore City at one point.
Right. I was actually appointed state's attorney when Frank Weathersby retired. He retired in May of 2013, and it's kind of interesting. The circuit court judges had to pick the next state's attorney to serve the rest of the term, which was about 18, 19 months. And there were 9 applicants, and I got chosen. And so
Had he also recommended you, or was it?
Well, he actually recommended his deputy at the time, which is understandable.
Sure.
But I got the position, and I actually tried a couple cases while I was state's attorney, ran in my first election, didn't win, and went to Baltimore. It was very interesting because I was recommended for a job in Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office by an attorney who was my opponent in a homicide. So even though we had this kind of knockdown, drag-out, very serious case, after I lost the election, he was recommending me to be hired. Right. Yeah. So I was head of the Special Victims Unit, which is all sexual assault, child abuse, and child homicide in the city of Baltimore.
Wow.
And so for the first time there, I found myself willingly trying child murders, which I had never done before, and made me a better lawyer. Never had to do those before, and now I don't do those anymore. I have staff to do that, but talk about growth and really putting yourself out there to serve victims and victims' families.
Yeah. So, so you had a lot of experience when you ran. I got to say that I was wonder why jobs that are so important and so dependent on experience are elected positions that I just sometimes feel like politics doesn't belong in certain places.
It doesn't, but politics do insert themselves into all kinds of jobs. I mean, if you're in the PTA, right, there could be politics. So if you are the elected state's attorney, you can decide, who to prosecute or who not to. I mean, you could decide to let people off of probation that maybe don't deserve it. Maybe someone would make a donation to your campaign. And, maybe you look the other way when their loved one comes into court and asks to change a sentence or something like that. So there's all kinds of things where people could really abuse the office. So I think the fact that I have to, and anybody has to report to the voters every 4 years is actually a good thing.
So I've noticed that you have personally stepped in and taken some of the really, really big, important cases. And one that I guess you and I were both candidates when the Capital Gazette shooting happened.
Yes.
And, the world stopped in Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. And I think you and I talked about this earlier, and you were talking about that it was almost like the whole community was wounded, and the pain was palpable at the vigils, and so there you were, you got elected, and you decided to prosecute that case. What was that experience like?
It was amazing and overwhelming and so gratifying. I personally met with all of the survivors and their family members in the first couple months that I was in office in January of 2019. The murder had occurred in June of 2018. And the ability for the surviving victims especially to be able to trust me and know that, by the time we got to trial, they would be strong enough to get on the stand and testify. They were so empowered. It was amazing to see. It was amazing to prepare that case because it meant everything to the community. And one of the things that really kind of frustrated me is I guess there was a sense of, well, if this person says that they are not criminally responsible, that they're insane or have some kind of mental health, issue, why not just let them plead guilty to that? And that went against every nerve in my being. Because he was not insane. It was a very calculated, cruel crime, and it needed to be brought to light what he did, and very satisfying to get the verdict from the jury that he was criminally responsible, and he got the maximum sentence under the law, 5 life without parole sentences.
And if he had been convicted, but they had determined that he was insane, what would the difference have been?
Well, the difference would be that he could be hospitalized in a secure facility, but subject to release if he was deemed treated. So if you have a false mental health illness, right, and you're faking it or you're exaggerating, malingering, they call it, one day he could have walked out 10, 20 years from then. To make room for someone who might need a bed. So the idea that he could get out under this false pretense of being so mentally ill that he couldn't control himself, it was very, very calculating. And I've got to tell you, the state doctors, Dr. Patel at the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, the amount of work that they did to inquire as to his mental health was just amazing. It was such a thorough job. I think he wrote a 120-page long mental health evaluation.
Well, it was gratifying to read about it, the coverage of it, even in the Capitol, and the reporters that were covering, which must have been hard as well. But knowing that you were handling the case, I think gave a lot of people confidence. That it was absolutely a commitment of this community, and I remember you not having a challenger in the next election. You actually ran unopposed for re-election in 2022, and I think at that point I was so awed by you and impressed that I started calling you. You might have to bleep this out, but badass Anne of Anne Arundel.
Yeah, that's a little embarrassing.
Yeah.
Every time you see me, Ashley, you say that.
Yeah, well, it has such a ring to it. and I, it's not a terrible thing to call a prosecutor, right?
True. It's funny because I guess not everybody, when you kind of toil in obscurity for many, many years, I'm not really a big grandstander. But that's the kind of work I've been doing for a long time, and it just became, I guess, in the public eye in the more recent years of my career. But that's kind of always been who I was. When I worked for Frank Withersby, he gave me, and again, I worked for him since 1990. Starting at about 1996 or so is when he started giving me homicide cases. So for the next 20 years, I got the most difficult cases. I didn't get the cases, we would joke, I didn't get the cases with a confession. I got the circumstantial, whodunit, you got to prove it kind of cases. And they were challenging and very fulfilling. And I try to do that now, not too many, because they are very overwhelming and they take up a lot of time, and you find yourself working, you're at the office at 6 a.m. and you're leaving at 8 o'clock at night. So those are tough.
So somebody who prosecutes murder cases, I in my probably ignorant way of thinking, would assume would get kind of hardened and badass. Maybe that's why I call you that. But the experience some of the experience that I've had with you is when you come in each year for your budget requests, your office actually comes to the county's budget office and they evaluate your spending and you sometimes have requests. In fact, you ran on being more fiscally disciplined about your budget because I think your predecessor ran the budget up and overspent and things like that. But I do remember you coming. You haven't had many requests, but you have come in to ask for some funding for staff to do victims services that weren't being provided before. So can you talk about why that was, how that's worked, and why that's important?
Well, one of the ways we expanded victim witness advocacy, every case with a victim in circuit court gets an advocate, but we didn't have enough people in the district court to help every single district court case to have a victim advocate except domestic violence. So because we got some extra positions from the county and from you, thank you very much, we were able to have any case where there was an assault on a member of the community has a victim witness advocate. And we've also been able to have people who work with children, advocates who work especially trained with children, and also advocates who are Spanish speaking, because we do have Spanish speaking victims. So that was the real need that we had. We have plenty of lawyers. It's the support personnel. And the other thing that is different is that now we all have body-worn camera. It's mandated throughout the state of Maryland. Every police department has it. And so for every hour of body-worn camera, for every officer who shows up at a crime scene, it takes about 2 or 3 hours to process that footage so that we can use it in court and present it. And we have to kind of silence, like if a victim says, here's where I work and here's my telephone number, here's where my child goes to school, we have to actually silence that portion so we're not providing that in discovery. So a lot of work. Has
that been helpful, though, in prosecuting cases?
Very helpful.
The body-worn camera footage?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It takes longer to prepare a case for trial, which is, a challenge. Because your attorneys aren't just reading the police reports now and witness statements, they actually have to go back and look at hours and hours and hours of footage and be prepared in that way. So it's very helpful, but it does make more work.
I remember when I think we talked about it in our first budget, didn't do it, and then the second year I think we did it. And you were one of the voices that was at least letting us know just how involved this would be. And that it didn't just mean having folks at the police department and all of that expense and all the technology that we'd have to buy, but it would be people in your office as well. And so it's the good news is that the officers have not I haven't heard a single officer really complain about that. I think it's It's probably protected officers in some cases where they did the right thing and they can prove it. And it's good to hear that it's also prosecuting. It's making it easier to prosecute, even though it's more time consuming in some.
Right. Well, it shows that officers are doing their job, that they're being respectful and polite and doing the right thing more times than not. I mean, it's a win-win for everybody. It's just, the more technology, the more evidence you have to prepare.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I know you've had a lot of other big cases, and some of them are ongoing, so we won't talk about any that are ongoing, of course. Are there any other sort of highlights over the last 6 years in this job that people should know about that you've been involved in?
Well, one of the things I did is I actually tried a white supremacist gang leader who was in the Maryland prison system and was, with just one word from him, he could order somebody in the prison to be murdered. And that was very challenging. And he'd actually ordered someone to be murdered, a rival gang member. And so that was fraught with all kinds of pitfalls.
What was the gang that he was?
He was with the Aryan Brotherhood. And he had, it was the most, let's just put it this way, it was the most polite cross-examination that I have ever done in my life because it was very challenging to ask somebody who could just order somebody's demise, very pointed questions.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really, we go up against some scary folks sometimes. You've seen judges who've been threatened. We had a judge in Western Maryland who was murdered by a civil family law litigant.
Yeah.
We have people who make threats on the telephone or by letter. So that's becoming a little bit more common and a little bit scary. Something that we seem to see a lot more of recently.
Yeah. I remember when I first came in, there was a lot of talk about MS-13 as this gang that was pervasive everywhere. And the police department gave me some data on the different gangs and how large they were. And I was surprised to see the white supremacist gangs among the others. But I'd never read about them in the paper. I'd never heard of it before. So anyway, thank you for doing that work. So what do you see as your job is to manage this institution? What are some of your challenges and goals there?
Well, finding good people and keeping them. We used to get, for every position, you would get 10 or 20 applicants. That's down. The law schools are not doing the same type of prosecutor clinics. I think with the George Floyd case and what people saw with that and the feeling, the sentiment around the country, there was a lot of anguish and pain. And so we have to promote what prosecutors do. And one of the things that we do is we clear people all the time. We will clear more people and dismiss more cases against people than a defense attorney could, because we can see all sides of the case. We can see if there's insufficient evidence. So the challenge is going to be getting people to want to do this kind of work, and to show that it's not just, we don't just put people in jail. We actually protect a lot of people's rights. We protect the rights of the accused. We protect the rights of everyday people. People try and charge police officers or teachers or firefighters with, crimes like assault. And there's actually a statute about they have, the district court commissioner has to get permission from our office before that can happen, because you can see how it could be abused. And Maryland has a district court commissioner system that anybody can go down to the commissioner and swear out a complaint against another person. And that person could get arrested without any police report or investigation being done. So you can see how enormous of a challenge that would be to make sure that someone is not being wrongfully charged. Some people use the criminal justice system to litigate civil issues that they have. They think it might be cheaper than hiring an attorney and suing somebody, right? So we have to guard against that all the time. So, and representing victims of sexual assault and child abuse. Very rewarding work, very tough work. We have an economic crimes unit. We have a narcotics unit. We have violent crimes unit. We have a juvenile unit that seeks to rehabilitate young people before they turn 18 and could face serious consequences. So there's a lot of facets of what we do that are meant to divert and keep people from becoming repeat offenders.
Do you feel public pressure in cases? You must worry, of course, if you decide not to prosecute, and then it turns out that person goes out and does something horrible afterwards. That makes you look bad. I mean, that makes your office look like you made a mistake. It could go the other way too, of course, but I know that the public can get really loud about, a sense that people that the system's not being tough enough on criminals, that we're being too soft on criminals. Do you feel pressure?
Well, I recognize when it exists, and I try to address it, right? In the, quote, olden days, Frank Weathersby didn't really speak to the press all that much. He had his spokesperson speak to the press, and usually it comes from me. And I will own it. If we make a mistake, I will acknowledge, that there's pressure to do things. But I think as long as you're open and honest and responsive, we are very responsive when the press makes inquiries of us. And, we're willing to provide, the statement of charges or, why we did a certain thing. Sometimes we're not allowed to comment if it's an open case. But I think if you are responsive and honest with people, it goes a long way. If you try to hide it or you're afraid of it, if you are afraid to do this job, then you shouldn't be in the job. And you're going to get criticism.
Yeah.
It goes with the territory. Whether you choose not to prosecute somebody or you do prosecute somebody, people will always have an opinion. And, what people need to understand is there are prosecutors out there who might have a really good record of, not losing a case. Well, that's because they're not bringing the cases. That's because they might be afraid.
Only bring the easy ones.
Bring the easy ones, bring the slam dunkers. But you have to be willing. Sometimes you get to a place with very, very serious cases where you have to make that hard choice. Are you willing to go out on a limb? The person did it. They did it. It's a really serious case, but you might lose. So what is your choice? So you can hide, or you can just put it out there. And
so here's one that's maybe a little more fun. By the time folks hear this, you will have already spoken as the keynote speaker at our Michelle Obama Awards for Women's History Month. That's tonight.
Yes.
And it's kind of cool that we're doing this interview the same day that you are going to be doing that. What's your message going to be on Women's History Month?
Oh my goodness.
I hope you've thought about it by now because it's already
I've written my speech.
3:30.
No pressure.
Okay.
I think what I have realized, you get to a certain age, right, for women, where you spend a lot of your youth worrying about what other people think. And at least as a woman. Or and not stepping on anybody's toes or hurting anybody's feelings. And don't get me wrong, still have to do that. But you get to a point where you are going to be your authentic self. And if I could say one message to women, it's okay to be your authentic self. Don't apologize. Be who you are, be real. And if you are, just like, the honesty, people see it, right? If you're not a real person, if you are some, fake or, like a politician. People say, I'm not a politician. Well, I'm not a fake politician. You have to, everybody's a politician, right? We have to go.
You have to run for office, yeah.
Right. Well, even just anything that we do, right? You have to worry about people's feelings, right? You have to, you can't just kind of be a bulldozer, right? So
you are supposed to represent them.
Right. Yeah. And so, just have to be honest in who you are, and I think people appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a great message because of all the pressures on everybody, but on girls in particular and young women and women. I think all of us, the older we get, the more willing we are to be ourselves.
Yeah, because we learn, right? And
Yeah.
but did anybody ever tell that to us when we were
To a young person, yeah.
Nobody does, right?
Yeah,
So-
and you're a great example because you walk the walk and talk, or yeah, I mean you carry yourself that way now. In fact, I've even noticed more so than 6 years ago, and I think everybody who you had more experience than I did coming in. You'd already run, you had already been in this work, but I watched you become more and more sure of yourself. But still listen, you still go to community meetings, you still are willing to take heat. And so I have a huge amount of respect for you.
Well, thank you.
And so when I call you Badass Anne of Anne Arundel, it's a compliment. Not just that you carry a big hammer. And I hope you're able to, keep making this county a better place and the world a better place for a really long time. And I will say that I didn't used to think about it this way, but I take great pride in the notion that this is not a good place to break the law. We have an amazing police department and we have a state's attorney that will catch you and you will, be held accountable for it. And I think that's really true. So thank you for making that.
Absolutely. Chief Awad says that all the time. That like if it's a violent crime, we're going to put the hammer down. But I tell her not to scare people. Just be a good person and you'll be fine. But no, we try really hard to make this place a safe place.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and I will see you tonight. Tonight being, the day that we're actually taping this, and y'all will hear this later, and you can probably go back and hear what the state's attorney said at the Michelle Obama Awards for Women's History Month by the time you hear this. All right, thanks everybody. And if you're listening, well, thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much for having me today.
And if you're listening and there's a subscribe button somewhere on the device, if you touch it, you will get an email, if you'll put your email address in there, that will let you know who our next guest is, and you can keep on top of all these episodes. Thanks.